Hello. Acha. Thank you all for joining us this evening for the Hirak Ghosh Memorial Lecture. It gives me deep pleasure to look around this room and see so many faces that were dear to Baba. But for those of you who didn't know Baba, I thought I would take a few brief minutes to tell you a little about him. Baba joined the IAS at a young age of 22. He loved his years in the districts of Bengal. He was in Purulia and Diamond Harbour, later district magistrate in Midnapur, Nadia. After that, his assignments took him to Delhi and Kolkata, later to Geneva and Kathmandu. What served him well in his various assignments was his deep intellectual curiosity, which was deep as it was wide. It didn't matter which department he was assigned to. He would fall deeply in love with the subject, whether it was social welfare, the environment, biotechnology, higher education. I was always amused to meet people he was working with in a particular field, and they would see that subject as his life's passion. But actually, all of these were his life's passion. He loved his work. He was a man of deep integrity. It was a defining quality of his. But sadly, when I think of my Baba, which I do many times a day, what comes to mind are the last 5 years of his life when he had ALS, a disease which is often known as also Lou Gehrig's disease. My thoughts always center around his grace and his strength. I would say he fought the disease bravely, but fought implies he might have failed. But something in the way Baba lived the disease made the failure impossible. His body was gone, but his mind was his to command, and he ruled his mind. To the end, his mind soared over his body. He was busy writing his memoirs. He was involved in innumerable projects to help the less fortunate. He was engaged with the world of politics. Which is why it is so fitting that we are remembering him with this lecture today. It gives me great pleasure to think how he would approve of this evening. To begin with, he would approve of the location. Ramakrishna Mission and its work was very dear to him. The last lecture he gave in public, he was already in a wheelchair. It was on climate change, and he spoke at this very location. He would also definitely love that Kaushik, my mama, is the speaker tonight. He was very fond of Mamu and was a huge admirer of his work. Even when it became difficult for him to get around the last few years of his life, he would still make it a point to attend any talk Mamu gave in Kolkata. He would also approve of the lecture's topic today, philosophical foundations of law and economics and its relevance to the political climate in both India and the rest of the world, where, as we know, the rule of law is very much under attack. And finally, he would approve of us starting on time. He was a punctual man. So without spending any more time, I would like to introduce my uncle, Professor Kaushik Basu. Oh, okay.
Okay. Swami Shuparnananda Maharaj Ji, other Swamijis of the order, students, I know there are students in the audience. I have not met anyone as yet. Various people from the world of economics and policy making, and generally the audience here. It gives me great pleasure today. It's a mixed feelings. It is in memory of my brother-in-law, but great pleasure at the same time to be here at the Ramakrishna Mission, Gold Park, giving this address. I also wanted to thank my sister Indrani Ghosh, who was very involved. I know he was continuously in touch with the Swamijis here, organizing it. Chandrani, who just spoke, my niece, was again very involved in the organization. Thank you. Thank you very much, all of you, for giving me this opportunity. I also want to say that for me, my brother-in-law was very special. There were three qualities of his, about his career and other things people know. He was a natural intellectual. He loved to read, to argue, to discuss. He was argumentative, and he was ethical and moral. The intellectual engagement till his last 4 years, when he was down with ALS syndrome, being wheelchaired around, once you began conversation with him in a wheelchair, you would have no sense that he had any particular problem. He was engaged with the world, with philosophy, with whatever he would be talking and chatting. Absolutely remarkable. I think there was a certain philosopher's calm with him. And today I will be alluding to David Hume, the great philosopher, who into his last days remained completely cheerful. And he said that I'm going into my death so cheerfully that this must be a bit sad for my enemies. And then he put in within brackets, if I have any, because he was a good-natured man, had very few enemies. And this must be good news for my friends that I'm going in with complete calmness into my death. This is David Hume. My Jamai Babu had some of those philosophers' traits. I'm not comparing his philosophical ideas, but that trait of calmness he had. He was ethical. He was ethical and moral. He did very well in his career, but I feel he would have done even better if he was willing to make moral compromises, which he would not make. And in my esteem, he goes up by that. And so that is in his memory, this talk. It gives me great pleasure that I'm doing it here. I want to say one more word about the Ramakrishna Mission. I barely practice any religion, but to me, Ramakrishna Mission holds a very, very special place. It's the broader message of tolerance, acceptance, questioning, which is the heart of Hinduism, and it upholds that. So for me, the Ramakrishna Mission has a very special place in my heart, and every time I come, I try to go to one center or the other because of today, where this is needed, this broader message. Swamiji, 11th September 1893 said, and that is what the mission is, philosophy is, I'm quoting, all of you know this for sure, we accept all religions as true. I am proud to belong to a nation which has sheltered the persecuted and the refugees of all religions and all nations of the earth. I have respect for the Ramakrishna Mission for upholding this principle, which is under attack today. Thank you very much for the long association I've had and for giving me the opportunity to speak. The topic of my lecture today is rather more academic, and part of the responsibility is on my sister and niece, because in conversation they were keen that I keep talking about the Indian economy endlessly. I should talk a little bit about my research, and that is what I'm going to do just now. The kind of analytical research that I'm doing, but I like to believe that it has very important bearings on our life. The interface between politics, economics, and law is a fascinating interface on which not enough has been done. Let me show you just one picture, if I can begin to move these properly. Yeah. This is a somewhat dilapidated home. Some of you who are into art will recognize that this is not a photograph. This is a painting by one of my favorite artists, Sanjay Bhattacharya. Sanjay Bhattacharya was a student of Bikash Bhattacharya. This is by Sanjay Bhattacharya. This is also by Sanjay Bhattacharya. I actually thought I'll take a photograph of a house somewhat dilapidated and show it to you, but it was easier for me to pick this, and I love his artwork. I'm showing this for a particular reason. This house is clearly in a state of dilapidation. I don't even know, it's not very clear if there are people living. Some of them, there are lots of people living. Some of them, there's no one living because it's in such bad shape. Why is it in bad shape? Why is it not being done up? Is it a shortage of bricks and mortars? The answer is no. There are enough bricks, enough cement in the country, and at a reasonable enough price that you can do it up. Is it a shortage of labor, that you don't have labor to do it up? The answer is no. The reason probably homes like this are in this state is the complex interaction between law and economics. When a law is drafted, unmindful of the incentives of people, how they will hold on to their rights, very often you will get situations which are frozen. Everyone can benefit if they can come to an agreement to do it up, use it properly. There will be an income out of it, and a whole lot of people may benefit. But probably so many people have such complex rights that they cannot put this to use. The interface between law and economics is extremely important, but there wasn't enough of discussion and analysis of the interface between law and economics. I have to say on this, the United States has been in the forefront with its antitrust law, which goes back to 1890. The Sherman Act is 1890. There are other laws, Clayton Act in 1916, Robinson-Patman Act in 1935. With these laws, United States was paying attention that when you draft a law, fairness, justice, all those things are important. But a law also impacts on how you will produce goods, whether you will undertake new projects, new initiatives. So the economics face of law, there was attention being paid. Not enough in India. I had one particular encounter with law. This is an old academic interest of mine, but I got engaged in this during my 3 years in the Indian government and 4 years in the World Bank when I lived the life of a policymaker. The encounter in the Indian government was quite interesting. You know, I had gone into government in 2009 with no experience in government, completely from the outside world. When I was in government, one thing would trouble me, the problem of petty bribery. Not just petty bribery, bribery and corruption in India. Extremely painful, extremely troublesome. And once you're in government and in a senior post, no one asks you for a bribe. The other government functionaries who typically ask you for a bribe, they know you're senior, you won't be asked. But I was not always doing that job. I remembered my days when trying to get a driving license. I drove very well. The person patted me on the back, says, "You drive very well, now give me some cash and I'll give you a license." It's very troublesome. So I had just joined government and I read up a little bit about India's law on corruption control and bribery control. This is the Prevention of Corruption Act 1988. According to this law, if you give a bribe and if you take a bribe, both are equally punishable. So giving and taking. If you do that, it struck me as an economist, there is one problem. When someone asks you for an unfair bribe, I'm talking of unfair bribes, where it's something legitimate. I'm supposed to get, I've done everything, I've done my income tax returns properly, and then they ask me for a bribe. In those cases, when the person asks for a bribe, you feel very angry. But if you do give the bribe, because there is no other way, after that, your interest and the bribe taker's interest are completely aligned. Both of you will try to hide the fact of this bribery because according to the law, both are equally punishable. I was very new in government, so I thought I've got a clever idea. This law should be amended that those who give a bribe where you're being asked for a wrongful bribe, they should not be punished at all. It's only those who take a bribe should be punished, maybe doubly punished. I thought it's a good idea, new in government, knew nothing about politics. I posted the idea on the Ministry of Finance's website. And that was the biggest public turmoil that I got involved in. There were people who were writing in to Pranab Mukherjee, that time the finance minister, to the Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, that I should be asked to leave the government for putting up such an immoral idea on the website that one side should be allowed to go free in the case of bribery and the other side should be punished. But I was All I was trying to say is that if you change the law in this manner, then when I'm forced to give a bribe, after that, I will not try to hide it anymore. I will stand up in court and say, I did give a bribe, I was asked to give a bribe. That will break the collusion and it will be easier to catch bribery. Nothing much came of it. I have to say those were a couple of days of big turmoil. I remember once Barkha called me, phoned me up and said, come on television, you've caused a lot of problem in the country, now come and defend. I was wondering whether to go on television or not to defend my idea. To an Indian audience, I don't have to say, which I have to explain to my American audience. On Indian television, you know, a discussion is a screaming match. So if I did appear, it would be 1 hour of screaming with a whole lot of people. And I thought I'm causing so much grief to the government that I was working with that I should phone up one of them. Pranab Mukherjee, I remember, that week was away in Vietnam. I could not call him. It was a Saturday. I phoned the Prime Minister's residence. And I said, I need to talk to the Prime Minister. Usually I don't like taking permission, but I said, I've caused him a lot of grief. I know he's received letters asking me to be thrown out of government. Before I go on television and cause another churn, I want to talk to him as to how he feels about it. They said, I'll talk to the Prime Minister and let's see what he says. 10 minutes later, Dr. Singh came on the line. And I said, Dr. Singh, I'm asked to go on television. I think I can explain my idea very well, but I want to know, that will churn up discussion once again, whether I should do it or not. His first reaction was, he said, Kaushik, actually I should tell you I've read about your idea. I think I don't agree with your idea. So I said, did you read my paper or newspaper reports? He said, no, I just read the newspaper reports. I said, Prime Minister, in that case, you're not getting an accurate picture of my idea. He said, no, I mean, from what I've read, I disagree. You know, beyond the point, how much can you argue with a Prime Minister? So I kept quiet. I said, in that case, I probably shouldn't go on television trying to explain. To which he said, no, actually, I think as an advisor, your job is to put ideas on the table for people to discuss. And even if it does cause me some difficulty, that's fine. You should try to explain, I disagree with you. But it was that kind of confidence. I remember after that when I was at a G20 meeting and I was talking about this, they were saying this kind of maturity you only get in developed countries. This kind of space to discuss ideas, bring them to the table. The follow-up of what happened to that idea, I don't want to go into. There was a lot of write-up back and forth, but that was within government, my encounter with law. But all that is something that I was sitting on, building up in my head. Then it's only after I came back to academe after 7 years that I thought I will write up my ideas on law and economics. I will take you into that, but the other part of economics, ignoring law is a big deficiency of economics, but another deficiency of economics is power and politics, which you see all around. If you read mainstream neoclassical economics, there is no mention of power or politics, as if power and politics does not matter. That used to always leave me very, very uncomfortable. And I felt that that's a big vacuum in economics. At that point, I had one fascinating encounter, which for me intellectually early was a very big influence. This was 1983 towards the end, or maybe early 1984. I was visiting Amartya Sen, Professor Amartya Sen, my PhD advisor at Oxford. And this was relatively early in my career. I had finished my PhD just a couple of years before that. Amartya asked me, Kaushik, what is it that you're working on now? I said, Amartya, I'm not working on it, but I'm just very troubled that we do economics with no reference to power and politics, whereas that's so important for us. Amartya said, in that case, at dinner, I will get you to sit next to Stephen Luke's political philosopher, who is an authority on power, so you can talk to him. I was very nervous. I was young and nervous, so I sit with Stephen Luke's. Stephen Luke's, we chat a little bit at dinner. He says, if you're interested in power, I can give you a document, which is written by a very famous Czechoslovakian. Have you heard the name of Václav Havel? He said it, asked the question in a tone where I should have heard of Václav Havel. I had never heard of Václav Havel. I felt very embarrassed by that, but I had to admit I had not heard. Václav Havel was at that time, before he became president of Czechoslovakia, he was a very well-known playwright and a dissident. He was leading the revolt against the totalitarian government of that time oppressing Czechoslovakia, the Russian collaboration oppressing Czechoslovakia. In the prison in 1978, Havel had written a document which had been smuggled out of Czechoslovakia. Stephen Lukes was helping that document to be translated into English for it to be published in English. It came out later called The Power of the Powerless. Luke said, if you're interested, I can give you a typed copy of that paper, Havel's smuggled out document. And I have to say, as a young academic working, this was one of the most exciting pieces of document I got in hand. I read it very carefully, and Havel's ideas, I will give you a glimpse straight away, goes to the heart of totalitarianism and totalitarian control. He was writing not as an academic, not as a game theorist, but as an intelligent politician, a thinking, moral, intelligent politician, and his analysis of Czechoslovakian oppression struck me as something very, very important. His idea is very simple, and I'll explain it to you. Though underlying that is some game theory, I will come to the game theory a little later, so you can go off to sleep when I come to the game theory. Don't sleep now, because I'll just give you the plain, simple political idea. Let me get some water. Havel never mentions the actual country. In this document, Havel is saying, to understand dictatorships and totalitarian regimes, you have to understand that we all play a role in it. Ordinary citizens, the leader, the dictator and the dictated, all of us are playing both these roles. He called this the post-totalitarian state, and he says, I'll describe you how power manifests in this state. Never a reference to Czechoslovakia, but he's writing about Czechoslovakia as how totalitarian states function. He says, if in Czechoslovakia you go to a greengrocer's shop, you will see posters on the window declaring loyalty to the regime. We support the current government. Havel will say that an outsider might at first sight say, gosh, the greengrocer is so loyal to the regime. But Havel says, no, if you know this country, you'll realize the greengrocer is not loyal at all. The greengrocer displays loyalty because the greengrocer knows, if I don't put up that poster, the party members will come and begin to harass me. The goons, ordinary goons, will come and begin to trouble me. They will stop my children from going to the school that they go. The onions and the tomato that I get from a supply, they will not arrive because they will begin to harass me. That's the reason why the greengrocer displays loyalty which he does not have. But Havel is a deeper thinker. Havel doesn't stop there. Havel says, but you have to ask the next level question. Why do the party workers and goons behave that way? Havel says it is entirely possible that it's the same reasoning with them. If the greengrocer does not put up a sign of loyalty, so is known to be disloyal, if you don't harass that greengrocer, you will be called disloyal. Others will begin to harass you. You will face the same kind of harassment. And that's why these goons pretend loyalty. So a totalitarian state can be trapped with loyalty being pretended to the leader, which none of them have that loyalty. They are mimicking it in their narrow self-interest, understandable self-interest. They are all worried of each other and caught in a trap. This is Havel's power of the powerless. Of course, when Czechoslovakia, the totalitarian regime collapsed, it collapsed, of course, very suddenly, and that's what happens. If it is built on this kind of mimicking of loyalty, when it collapses, the loyal goons and supporters vanish completely out there into thin air, they go. This is Havel's early description, and if you see, this same idea is there earlier. I began working on this and writing, given my own interest, mathematical papers on this, trying to give it concrete shape. Then I discovered that in the middle of the 18th century, one particular philosopher had actually said very similar things. This is, for me, the philosopher, my biggest influence, David Hume. David Hume had very similar observations, and I'll come to David Hume just now. When I say David Hume was my biggest influence, that is actually not quite right. Hume, every time I've reached a conclusion about an idea, I find Hume already has that. So Hume, for me, has been a great reinforcement of ideas. And also I like Hume as a person, as a human being. I know that's not always the most important thing. If an idea is important, you have to take that idea. Pythagoras, who gave us one of the most important theorems, was a pretty obnoxious human being. The theorem is correct, but he was an obnoxious person. David Hume, he was also a very good human being, and that does appeal to me. Led a very, very simple life. Never got married, lived with his mother most of the time. One of his best friends was Adam Smith, who also was a similar person. Hume's ideas were very radical, very progressive, attacking the conventional church and all, but he was a mild, gentle person, and in his autobiography is a sign of his modesty. It's maybe the shortest autobiography by any prominent person's, 23 pages autobiography, where he says that I'm a person of mild temperament, I prefer the company of women more than men. So there are things he says about himself very nicely. Hume I liked very much. Then when I began reading Hume, I actually on Hume, both on various areas of moral philosophy, I find I'm at with him. I should also mention, biggest influence, when I said for me, the biggest influence in Calcutta, I have two big influences intellectually. Hume was a later discovery. One is Bertrand Russell, whom I discovered in school, who taught me to question everything I'm being taught. And actually at one level, Swami Vivekananda's teaching is that. You have to question everything and accept if your mind is persuaded. I got that from Russell. Also my father, who was very impatient with spending too much time with intellectual ideas, was a person of remarkable intelligence, and I think on a whole host of even philosophical matters, he spoke very little of those things. He had very, very deep perception. And one thing which as a child did affect me, my father would go to a temple, Kalitala, once a week, always. Once a week he would go. This was sort of almost without fail, but very often on the way to the temple, my father would say, and this as a child I would hear, that I don't think God exists, but I don't want to take any chances. And he would go off, like Blaise Pascal, the philosopher I later discovered, took that line. So, and my father led a very conventional life, and I think he was just a questioning mind. He was questioning all the time, but he had no patience for this, but he was a very big influence for me. So those were the big influences. Hume I discovered later, and Amartya Sen, my advisor, was a very big influence. Now, I must quote Hume, where Hume is saying something very similar to what Havel was saying. I'm quoting. This is Hume in 1742. No man would have any reason to fear from the tyranny of a tyrant if he had no authority over any but from fear. Saying just for fear you would not be scared of the tyrant. Since as a single man his bodily force can reach but a small way, and all the further power that he possesses must be founded either on our opinion or on the presumed opinion of others. It is people's beliefs about the leader which gives the leader the power. It's not, the leader won't come and physically do anything to you. And in 1758, in the first principles of government, Hume again goes on to say, nothing appears more surprising to those who consider human affairs with a philosophical eye than the ease with which the many are governed by the few. So once you take a philosophical view, it's completely puzzling how a few people, 2-3 people, can oppress a huge population. Is very puzzling. When we inquire by what means this wonder is affected, it's a wonder how they control. By what means this wonder is affected, we shall find that the governors have nothing to support them than opinion. It is on opinion of ordinary people, that government is founded. And this maxim extends to the most despotic and most military governments, as well as to the most free and most popular governments. In the end, it's nothing but opinions and beliefs about one another that gets it going. And this is what led me to my more contemporary work, which is, this is the book that I wrote, The Republic of Beliefs. After I finished my 7 years in government, Cornell was very kind to me, gave me virtually 1 year free to work on ideas that had got loaded in my head, and I returned to this topic to work on this. Instead of you're staring at my book, you'll enjoy more as I speak to look at Sanjay Bhattacharya's paintings till I need the slide once again. Okay, so that is what I worked on, and that is what had got me gripped. In my book, I argue that all these opinions, views about political power, the power of even the law, why is the law so effective when it is effective? Often the law is not effective. Why do people obey the law? All these questions, in the root of it, there is a very, very big open question that needs to be answered. The hint of that is there in the work of Havel. The hint of that is there in the work of David Hume. But to formalize that, you need something more. And that formalization is much more difficult. And Hume was such a phenomenal thinker, he would have done it, but he did not have one instrument of analysis with him, which is game theory. If you bring in some elementary conceptual game theory into this kind of political economy analysis, you can begin to get an understanding of both law and of power using roughly the same instruments. And let me begin with, in 1989-90, I gave a series of lecture at Princeton University, which was published, called Lectures in Industrial Organization Theory. At the end of that lecture, in the last chapter, I write something which puzzled me a little bit. America's antitrust law, the Sherman Act that I was talking about, very widely used in the United States. Currently there is a big debate raging because of the big platforms like Amazon and Google. They are finding it very difficult to control them. These mega platforms, Facebook, Google, Amazon, even Uber and things like that. How do you use the law is a big debate going on, a lot of being written. But the law has been used for 100 years. The question that was troubling me, which in this book I raise a few times, why do people obey the law just because it is the law? In the end, a law is nothing but a few words written down on paper. If you do this, you will be punished. If you do that, you will have to go to jail. But just because someone wrote those words on paper, why is our life changed? Why am I then scared to do something, and why will someone come running after me and punish me? I left that as an open question, and I called this the ink on paper fallacy. That it's not very clear why putting some ink on paper and writing down changes our view of things. That analysis I do in this book as to why it may change, and it's a very different explanation from conventional game theory. But for that, as I was saying, you need a little bit of game theory, and in a public lecture like this, I can just give you a sort of 5-minute broad introduction to game theory. Game theory's origins go far back. Actually, one of the most important papers in game theory was in 1912 by the German mathematician Zermelo. It's about the game of chess, literally about the game of chess. But theorems on human interaction come in the early 1950s. Actually, 1944 is one very important work by von Neumann and Morgenstern. But 1950 to 1953, a series of papers by probably the most important name in game theory, John Nash. Many people have heard of John Nash. One of the most powerful mathematicians. He's got important papers in mathematics, 4 papers in economics, depending on how you define economics, all done by the age of 29. By the age of 30, he's in hospital with his schizophrenia. He's in a mental home almost entirely through his life. Tragic character, phenomenal mind. His PhD thesis is very famous, 23 pages. There he creates the concept of an equilibrium in human societies, which we today refer to as a Nash equilibrium. The idea of Nash, the broad idea was there from 1838. There are students of economics in the audience. Curno had used similar ideas but without the breadth of Nash. Then Nash comes with this paper. So Nash works till the age of 29, completely fused after that, out of his mind with acute schizophrenia. In the late 60s, he's in remission. I should tell you on a personal note, I had 2 encounters with John Nash, which are very, very memorable for me. When I was giving those lectures in Princeton, on the blackboard, I would be continuously teaching about Nash, Nash equilibrium, these are the properties, etc. And Nash would be out there in the yard, pacing up and down. He could do that for 3 hours. In a short yard, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth in his own world. The people who are permanent people in Princeton were used to Nash doing that. They didn't react. For me, this was a strange feeling. I'm teaching about Nash, and here is this person virtually out of his mind. So me and another visiting professor in Princeton that time called Jürgen Weibel, who's a friend of mine, 2 of us decided, let's try to have a lunch with John Nash. So with a lot of effort, we sent a message to him, and we had this completely uneventful lunch. Nothing really happened during the lunch. In fact, his mind was still distracted. He would say 2-3 coherent sentences, then his mind would drift off. In fact, my 2 memorable things I should tell you. One was, I asked him where the word Nash comes from, his family surname. To that, he gave a very cogent reply. He said, actually, it comes from Sanskrit, Nashika. I don't know if it's true or not. That's what he told me. And there was another thing which today, it came back to me because of Abhijit Banerjee's Nobel Prize. It was Jürgen Weibel, me and John Nash having this lunch, and Nash is already a celebrated name. Abhijit came and joined us for lunch. And I remember we said, Abhijit, this person is John Nash. And Abhijit's reaction was like if a literature person joins you at a table and you said, this is Shakespeare having lunch with us. Abhijit sort of fell back that it's John Nash sitting and having lunch with us, but very little conversation. I met him once more, I should tell you. This was in January 2003. He had already got the Nobel Prize. There was a very big event in Bombay. Amartya Sen was there. John Nash was there. Robert Aumann, another Nobel laureate from Israel, was there. Big gathering. They gave these big lectures, all of them. Then the next day was these shorter lectures, and I was giving a lecture. I entered a small auditorium with 30-40 people about to give my lecture. To my dismay, I see John Nash walking in and sitting in the front row. And I said, I've now had it. Giving a lecture with Nash equilibrium, with Nash sitting over there, is a very, very troublesome thing. But actually, I need not have worried at all, because within 5 minutes, he fell asleep, fast asleep. He never woke up through my lecture, so he had no idea what I talked about. That was my second encounter with Nash. Nash's equilibrium idea, I will tell you very briefly. Nash's equilibrium idea is the following. The conceptual part of it is very easy. In this room, all of us, when we go out into society, if we reach an kind of behavior where each of us feels, given what other people are doing, the behavior I've chosen for myself is the best. I don't want to change. If everyone feels that way, that I don't want to unilaterally behave differently, then that system of behavior is an equilibrium. It's a Nash equilibrium. I will just now give you actually very, very simple game and explain it with you. Now, the Chicago fallacy is, why will a little bit of ink make a difference to how people behave? You have to combine the Nash equilibrium idea with another idea from game theory, which is due to Thomas Schelling, which is called the focal point. And this I will explain to you with a game which I will display on the board. And just because it's game theory, don't switch off, because it's completely intuitive. You'll be able to understand what's happening. Yeah, let me do it with this one. This is called the squares game. Suppose you and another person is playing this game. And this is a very simple game. Here's the rule. You will choose one square, and the other person will choose one square. You can't talk to each other. No exchange of notes. After you've chosen the square, I'm the mediator. I will look at the squares you've chosen. In case you've chosen the same square, you'll get 1,000 rupees, both of you, each of you. If you have chosen different squares, you'll get nothing. That's the rule. In this game, there's no question of intelligence. I mean, what do? You don't know what the other person is going to do. So, as long as both of you choose the same, you'll be very happy. So the game has lots of nashes. Any square, if it's chosen by both, each will say, thank goodness I chose that, I don't want to change. But which one of those many nashes will be chosen? Any square chosen by both is a nash, but which one will be chosen? It's not clear. If you make people play this game, and I've done this many times, they'll choose all over the place. Someone will choose the bottom corner on the right-hand side, someone will choose something in the middle, someone will choose on the top left-hand side. Most of the time it will be different squares, they will get nothing, they'll go away. Now, I will not change the game at all, but I'll spill a little bit of ink on paper, and that will make a difference. You're going to play the same game. Nothing in the game rules have changed, but unfortunately I smudged one square with a little bit of ink. Ignore that, because that does not make any difference to the rules of the game. Choose the same square, you'll get 1,000 rupees. Choose different squares, you will get nothing. Think a little bit, what will you choose after this? When you're playing with someone else, the other person can see the board, you can see the board. What will you do? It's overwhelming. If you actually thought and played after this, virtually everyone will choose the square with the smudged ink. That's just something which allows you to coordinate with the other person. It's something almost mystical. In the end, if both of you chose something else, that's as good. But the square allows you to coordinate with the other mind. You know that this is the salient square, the square standing out. So I like to believe the other person will know that it's virtually impossible to coordinate. Let's both choose this. This little bit of mental exchange that takes place is the notion of focal point due to Thomas Schelling. Focal point is a strange psychological ability of human beings to coordinate. One of the most practical examples of a focal point you will see is, in the olden days, if you've decided to meet someone at an airport and have not decided where to meet, you'll be going around looking for that person. Some 20 years ago or 30 years ago, it struck some airport authority that in the middle of the airport, anywhere, put up a big sign saying meeting point. No one is forced to go there, nothing, you can ignore it if you want. But as soon as that sign is available, people trying to meet each other find it much easier to meet each other. You know that the other person knows that you know that the other person knows that you will go there. And likewise for the other person, and you begin to meet. This psychological ability is called the focal point, and my own view is that in the end the law works because of a very fundamental way. It is the focal point. Law creates focal points, and let me explain a little bit in words from a very practical problem. You're driving from Calcutta to Delhi by road. If there are no speed limit laws, you will still decide. Most people will do a bit of rational thinking. Yes, I want to get to Delhi soon, but I don't want to drive too fast. You will calculate the costs and benefits of driving fast. If you go fast, you'll reach sooner, but there's a risk of an accident on the way. You'll decide that I won't go above 100 kilometers per hour, 110 kilometers per hour. Now let us suppose that the government brings in a new law, which is written down on paper, that you're not allowed to drive faster than 80 kilometers per hour, a sentence on a piece of paper. If you do, you'll be caught and punished. Conventional law in economics, which goes back to the 1960s, the Chicago school writing, will say that this has an effect because of the following reasoning in our heads. When I'm planning to drive to Delhi, apart from all those earlier calculations, if I drive fast, I'll reach soon. If I drive too fast, I might have an accident. There'll be one more calculation now. If I'm driving above 80 kilometers per hour, I might get caught. And if caught, I'll have to pay a fine. And that also comes into my calculation, therefore I slow down. The Chicago school, for those who are familiar, is an ultimate sort of right-wing free market school of thought, which takes the view that all human beings are ruthless machines just making their selfish calculations for optimization. And that's the way they modeled it. But there was one very big open question that Gary Becker did not ask in this. Gary Becker explains why you will drive slower, because if you drive faster than 80 kilometers per hour, the police will come and catch you. But Gary Becker never explains why will the police catch you just because something is written down on paper. That opens a second layer of questions. Why will the police do that? If the police is a part of the game of life, you should have talked about the police right to start with, instead of treating the police as a perfect moral creature or a robotic creature who will do the job, and all human beings are selfish. There's an inconsistency in the Chicago school. All the enforcers of the law are perfectly moral creatures. They just do their job. All ordinary citizens are perfectly selfish creatures. Gary Becker was unaware of that. He was implicitly assuming that the police will do what the police is asked to do. But you have to explain that. And the explanation has to lie in the end that after the law is changed, the police will calculate if people keep going fast, and if I don't stop them, after some time my boss will call me up and not promote me. I will lose out, so it's in my interest to enforce the law. And the boss will do that because of someone else, and that someone else because of someone else. We are back to the world of Václav Havel and David Hume. Writing on paper triggers our expectations about one another's behavior. My expectation about the policeman's behavior, the policeman's expectation about the policeman's boss's behavior, and together the law becomes effective when it does. There will be many situations where the law will not be effective, but when it is effective, it will happen for that reason. This endogeneity of functionaries, where you bring in the machinery of the state as part of the economic model. So in economics, we treat the government and the state as outside the modeling. Only ordinary citizens going about their maximization. If you bring them all into the picture, the way you analyze law and economics becomes very different. And the analogy, closest analogy you can think of is in economics, the movement from partial equilibrium analysis to general equilibrium analysis. To realize that the market for onions is affected by the market for potatoes. The market for potatoes is affected by the market for rice. A price change here affects a price change there. This happened in the middle of the 19th century. Actually, there is probably a date on which this happened. Stanley Jevons, on 19th of February 1860, made a diary entry saying that an idea has suddenly struck me, which now makes me read contemporary political economy with disdain, because Jevons got a blinding sight of this connectivity of the system. Later on, it would be modeled by Leon Walras and others taken further forward. I should tell you, the intellectual world is a world of excitement and tragedy, because this idea, it strikes Jevons in 1860. Walras develops it in 1874, it continues there onwards. But there was one person who actually had the same ideas. In 1854, he had published a document which was unknown. He was a German scholar, Hermann Heinrich Gossen. Gossen was a bureaucrat. He hated the job of a bureaucrat, but Gossen's father was insistent that he must not ever waste time writing economics. So Gossen could not write economics till his father died and he was retired. Then he wrote this very pompous book where he says, I'm doing for human life what Copernicus did for the stars. And actually it's a brilliant book published in 1854, and it's to the credit of Stanley Jevons, who in the introduction to the second edition of his book says that I thought I had done it first, but actually many years before that it had been done by this German Hermann Heinrich Gossen. And such is the tragedy of his life that I don't even know today whether he's still alive or dead. As it happens, he was dead. 1858 is where Gossen died, he's gone. That is bringing the entire subject into a broader framework, and that is what I'm suggesting that we ought to do. I don't want to take you into details, but I'll show you one reason why in societies like India, the law malfunctions and people look the other way. And this is to do with, once you ground it in this kind of a theory, let me see, with two pictures, I'll explain it to you. Yeah. Suppose you live in a society where there are social norms about how you behave, what you do. Suppose there is a social norm that when you play the squares game, So forget about my earlier thing, that blue square is a social norm. When two people are asked to play this game, you typically choose that. And once the norm is in place, it's in your interest to follow the norm, because then you get rewarded for that. Most people follow, some don't follow. Now, if you try to improve this by bringing in a law, saying that, look, I see very often people don't manage to choose this, let's make a law that everyone should choose the red square. I've made one square red and I tell everyone to choose the red square. What do you think will happen? If that norm was reasonably well entrenched, as soon as you bring in the red square, you will get a greater chaos in society. Some people will think that the blue is what we'll do, the social norm. Some will think it's the red, which is the new law. And actually coordination can break down and you can do worse by this. There are some beautiful studies, historical studies by Anand Swamy and Rachel Cranton of the British bringing in usury laws, credit market laws in Bombay, Deccan. The British came in and saw that the credit market does not function well in India. So they brought in the British law in the Bombay, Deccan. What was discovered after that, and the paper by Cranton and Anand Swamy is a paper that is not commenting on the why, but just the interesting thing. After the British brought in the law, the market started functioning worse. One of my views is that what happens is after the new law is brought in, is that the coordination breaks down. You're already used to something, and then the law says you do something else. Now I don't know what the other person is going to do. And the other person doesn't know what I'm going to do. So you can see a breakdown. One of the reasons why in countries like ours, which have a very long tradition, something we should be proud of. There are some awful social norms, no one should be proud of those, but we also have good norms, we also have lots of legal sophistication historically. That's why when laws come in from outside, very often you begin to get a confusion in society. You don't know which one people are playing by, and that can cause a mismatch and malfunctioning that is happening in the world. This is where I will stop. I'll just tell you just one thing about, this is a relatively abstract talk I gave, but in the book, towards the end, I talk about something with American scholars, legal scholars, a lot of them have been very engaged in, is the global constitution. Today we live in a world where there is a lot of conflict across societies. It saddens me to see that this is happening, but it is happening. One of the reasons for that could be that groups of people with different norms are coming to live together, and just to say that, look, let each person do what that person wants to do is not good enough. There are conflicts which you have to be clear-headed enough to answer. I'll give you a very simple example. Suppose on one island, people drive on the left-hand side. On another island, they drive on the right-hand side. These two islands function very peacefully. In a globalized world, when they begin to travel on the same island, these two norms will begin to conflict. You will need a minimal amount of global convention to prevent conflict in these kinds of situations. Many people say that global conventions are impossible because we don't have global government. But my view on that is, government is in the end nothing but Hume's notion of our beliefs about one another. And even on the global stage, it is possible to bring in certain minimal norms which allow people of different backgrounds, different expectations to live together happily. There is this need for people to get together, think of the intellectual foundations of law, economics, and power, and craft and design rules of global behavior, and it should be minimal. You don't want impositions on people of different kinds of norms, and there will be some turmoil because the bigger countries will try to exercise greater power when they do that. But this is a direction in which we have to go in today's globalized world. With the rise of technology and globalization, the landscape of the world is changing. And let me allow actually 3-4 more minutes. I do want to say on regulation, this is important. Technology is changing the landscape. And I do worry, India, which was among emerging economies, India was in the forefront intellectually. I studied in India, in Kolkata, then in Delhi. I remember going to international conferences. As an Indian, you never feel out of place because there's always a critical mass of Indian presence. And that is just a tribute to the early investment in education, top quality education. People would be there on the global scene. Education is beginning to take a back seat in India. The drop in global rankings is very, very visible that India is beginning to slide. We have to keep it up because the landscape of the world is changing. Currently, we are in the middle of a change where it is radical regulation which has saved the world last time. From 1750 to 1850, roughly the period of industrial revolution, because of technological leaps and bounds, the world was completely changed. There are many people, complete market fundamentalists, would say that we did fine at that time. We will do fine again with the new technology, artificial intelligence, robotics. We'll do fine again. No guarantees. The reason we did fine during the Industrial Revolution was that was also the period of a lot of radical thinking, top quality thinking. After all, within my profession, virtually the most productive phase for the profession, 1776 is Adam Smith's work, 1848 is the work of John Stuart Mill. It's populated with powerful work taking place over those 100 years. Regulation changes dramatically. 1842, income tax comes into Britain. When income tax comes in, first people are very angry. How dare the government take away 8% of my income? Now we think it's normal. The government will have to take some and use it for the public goods. Labor laws came in from roughly Robert Peel's Act in 1802 to 1850. Important labor laws come in. That time those laws were very radical. Now if you read those laws, you'll feel that kind of protection any worker should get seems natural. I feel today we are at a regulatory juncture, intellectual juncture, which is very similar. And don't for a moment think that just because we escaped that big revolution in technology, we will also escape this. After all, civilizations have collapsed. The Indus Valley civilization flourished from 3000 BC to 1800 BC roughly. Then it vanished over a very short period. It could happen, but we are a thinking population. We can analyze ourselves better than people in the Indus Valley could. We have to think that the world's landscape is changing, technology is changing. You need radical changes in reforms to make it possible for poor people who are being thrown out of work because of the rise of technology, for them to be included. This is a time when we need radical thinking in regulation, as was done during the Industrial Revolution, and we need radical new ways of thinking, as happened from roughly 1750 to 1850. India had a head start on that. It saddens me greatly to see we are sliding back. We have to, one of the most important things, if top-down you don't allow a diversity of opinion, if your opinion is different from the opinion coming down from the top, immediately you're hounded out, that you will be given no hearing. That is a sad day for India. And India on this front had taken a lead like no other country. Really, if you look at the 1940s and 50s, host of countries became independent with the similar motivation as India's. Then one coup after another, one religious takeover of a whole country's machinery after another, corruption scandals caused countries to fall and collapse into military coups, military dictatorships. India stood up for a remarkable length of time, and we have to bring this in. And I say this even more in Kolkata, which has been the hub of new ideas and new thought. We have to reclaim that and reclaim that for all of India. Thank you very much.
So I have only to thank the speaker, Dr. Kaushik Basu, and also the listeners, the learned listeners. We have in our midst Mr. Tathagato Rai, the governor of Meghalaya, and so many renowned economists also and students of economics. But I know there are some other audiences who are not so well versed in economic theories, which Professor Basu just propounded. But one thing is certain, that we have to rewrite our textbooks on economics. Economics we read. is valid only in a dreamland, I should say. We read economics under so many assumptions. You all know that. We read economics under the major assumption that there is perfect competition prevailing everywhere. And we have defined perfect competition as a state where there is no competition at all. So game theoretic approach is just a protest to that. You all know. You can assume away this state and rethink the way you can put in the theories having a real relevance to our real economy state. And he has given a hint of that even at the end of his lecture. Otherwise, we would be thrown out, maybe. I think I should not prolong my speech. I thought it would have been given in terms of the power that our politicians enjoy, and with the help of that power and the law, they would make our life more miserable than we feel. But today's speaker, he has given a treatment to the topic which none of us even had any wild imagination. I didn't expect that he would take us to this grand feast. We enjoyed that very much. And those who are not students of economics proper, I think they had also had a little bit of taste of it. Once again, I thank you all. Thank Professor Bosu. Thank you.